Tag Riding Hell for Leather. Chapter 3. The column slowed when the trees broke and the river spread wide before them. The sun beat down. It felt like the sky was made of brass, scorching hot. The Ohio moved like a living thing, brown swells carrying driftwood and the gleam of sunlight glinting off the water. Rook reined in Gypsy and felt her ears twitch at the smell. Behind him, the long tail of Morgan's cavalry bunched and stretched, iron shoes ringing on the packed road. A shout went up by the bank. Calder looked upriver and saw two steamboats just come into view around the bend. The mountain howitzers were being rolled up, ready to bring the boats to shore with a well-placed shot. When the boats were a couple 100 yards upriver, the first howitzer fired. The round smacked the water and skipped no more than 50 feet in front of the lead boat. That was enough. Both boats veered toward the bank. "They'll take their sweet time," muttered Mo, riding up on Frog, his lean buttermilk done, eyes narrowed against the glare. "One boat won't do it. Two won't either. It'll take several trips. You ever try to stack near 1,000 horses belly to flank on one deck?" "No," Rook said. "But I'm about to watch the circus." The men settled into restless waiting. Horses sidestepped and blew, sweat streaking their flanks. The air carried the stink of sweat, mud, and fear. Riders swung down stiff-legged, some lighting pipes, others squatting by the mud bank and staring at the far shore. Nobody spoke much. "They'll never manage this quick," said Sergeant Albright, spitting into the weeds. "We'll be the rest of the day and half the night loading." "Better half the night than stuck here like hogs for slaughter," Mo shot back. "Federals will smell us soon enough." Rook said nothing. He was watching the water, measuring the current, the distance, the way the far bank sloped higher. A man could get trapped easy if guns waited in those trees. At last, the first steamboat, belching smoke, nosed to the bank, its paddle wheel chopping the river into froth. The second followed, slower, one side wheezing like a man with bad lungs. The sight of them drew a murmur from the men, part relief, part dread. The captains nosed the boats against the bank. Gangplanks went out quick. The crews looked nervous, glancing at the ragged line of gray cavalry like they'd rather be anywhere else. "Get 'em moving," came the order down the line. What followed was no neat parade. Horses balked at the smell and the plank's hollow drum. Men cursed, slapped, shoved reins, pulled tight on bits. One mount reared, striking sparks from the gangplank before crashing sideways into the mud. It took 3 men to get him righted and up again. Another slipped halfway and nearly went under before the crew grabbed the bridle and hauled him in. "Sweet Jesus," muttered Mo, sweat running down his temple. "You pack 'em this close and one spook, the whole load goes over." Rook guided Gypsy steady, talking low to her. The mare's hooves clattered hollow as they reached the deck. All around him the press of horses was suffocating. Flanks rubbing, tails swishing, heads tossing against tight reins. The deck creaked under the weight. The smell was sharp. Iron, piss, sweat, fear. "Keep 'em tight," shouted a lieutenant near the prow, but his own horse nearly crushed him against the rail. By the time the first boat lurched into motion, men were pale, gripping whatever they could. The paddle churned. The river hissed under the weight. Every eye was on the far bank, half expecting blue uniforms to break from the trees and tear them apart while they floated like penned cattle. It took near an hour to reach the other side, the boat straining, the horses stamping and shuddering at every groan of timber. When they finally scraped against the far bank, the gangplank dropped with a thud. Men urged their mounts forward, hooves clattering as they spilled out onto soil that wasn't home anymore. The second boat, older and slower, had worse luck. Halfway across, the engine coughed black smoke and shuddered hard. The whole mass of horses flinched at the jolt. For a moment, it looked like they'd lose the load. Curses filled the air, hands white-knuckled on reins and lead ropes, but the crew nursed the crippled paddle until the bank came near enough to scrape mud. Rook swung down the moment Gypsy's hooves hit dry ground. He rubbed her neck, feeling her muscles quiver. Mo joined him, rifle held ready. They stood together watching the second boat unload in chaos. "Now what?" Mo asked, low. They knew a fight waited upriver. Every man knew it. They could bypass, maybe, slip through hills, but Rook had been watching Morgan's face all day, and he read the pride there. Pride could be deadlier than bullets. Rook spat in the dust. "Now we see if we're riding into a trap or into history." The Ohio lay behind them now, but Mo still felt the churn of the ferry boats in his bones. Horses didn't belong on boards that buckled like swamp reeds, stacked so tight they could hardly breathe. He'd spent the crossing with one hand on his sharps and the other steadying the dun while the horse rolled its eyes like it was seeing the devil in the river. When the planks groaned and a gelding slipped, Mo thought for sure the whole load would go into the drink. But Calder Rook had been there, seeing what was coming before it happened. Not panicked, but sharp, yelling at men to haul ropes and push shoulders until the animal was up again. That was why Mo stuck by him. Not for debt. Not for rescue. Rook didn't treat him like a slave or half a soldier like the rest of Morgan's command often did. He looked at Mo as a man, a scout, an equal. That was rare, and rare things, Mo knew, were worth sticking with. The steamer still worked the river by sundown, bringing over the tail of Morgan's column. Mo squatted on a rise above the camp, the sound of hooves dull and hollow against the planks, the river thick with mist. Fires flared on the Indiana side, their smoke mixing with the night fog until you couldn't tell which was river and which was sky. The last men staggered up from the bank half dead with weariness. Some simply dropped where they stood, reins slipping loose from raw hands. Others cursed at tack that had rubbed sores into their horses' hides. Saddles sagged, girths hung slack. These weren't the proud horsemen of the South anymore. Just shadows with sabers clinking against their thighs. And the mounts, Mo's gut twisted at the sight of them. Thin foam crusted along necks and chests. Legs quivered under the weight of a day and night spent marching without mercy. They'd made near 50 miles since yesterday's dusk, with only broken halts for water and mouthfuls of corn. No horse in God's green earth could keep that pace and come out right. What they needed was 3 days tied out to graze, not one restless night. But Mo had the sense Morgan would push them again tomorrow. Surprise was the man's gospel. Horses were the sacrifice. Calder knew it too. Mo saw it in his face. A look passed between them across the firelight. No words but plenty said. They both understood the risk. Push too far, too fast, and the mounts would give way, leaving men on foot in enemy country. Rook's eyes carried that weight, but he didn't speak it where others could hear. Morgan wouldn't have welcomed the doubt. Around them, camp life stumbled into shape. Men stripped off boots and dipped swollen feet in the river. Others gnawed at hardtack or boiled whatever bacon and salt pork scraps they could scrape together. A few kept up nervous chatter, boasting of what tomorrow might bring, but most just sat slack, staring into the fire like it might carry them home. Mo cleaned his rifle slow, laying each cartridge neat beside him. That Sharp's Big 50 was his pride and joy, though he doubted there'd be a fight before dawn. His hands needed something steady to do. His mind kept circling back to the mounts, the way their heads hung low, ropes slack, eyes dull. Horses spoke truer than men about the wisdom of a commander, and theirs told him this raid was burning too hot. He thought of Calder again. Rook wasn't a quiet man, but he wasn't loud either. He wasn't looking for fame. He measured the ground, measured men, and spoke when it mattered. That steadied Mo more than any sermon Morgan could have preached about glory. Calder didn't treat him like some Seminole slave boy. He didn't treat him like a curiosity. He treated him like a soldier. No more, no less. And that was all Mo ever wanted. One thing for sure, Moses Jerry had already made up his mind. He wasn't going back to Kentucky as a slave. Those days were over. The fires burned lower. Men rolled in their blankets, groaning as stiff backs hit the earth. Horses shifted and stamped, some too spent even to graze. The riverboats creaked one last time in the distance as they chugged out of sight. Silence closed in, broken only by the low murmur of guards on the picket line. Mo lay back on his blanket, rifle at his side, the damp earth cold through his shirt. He watched the sparks drift upward, fading into the fog, and thought about the miles ahead. Tomorrow, Morgan would turn them north again. But tonight, at least, there was still breath in his chest and a strong will to live. And for Mo Jerry, that was enough. The first gray light bled over the trees when Mo stirred. The camp was still, just the low snore of men who'd collapsed in their boots and the occasional shift of a tired mount. He rose quiet, shook the dew from his blanket, and nudged Calder with the toe of his boot. "Sun ain't up yet," Calder muttered, rolling onto an elbow. His voice was gravel and sleep, but his eyes were clear enough. Best time, Mo said. Grass'll be wet, and we'll get the pick before the rest drag their nags out half dead. Calder grunted, sat up, and began tightening his belt and sliding into his boots. The two led their horses downriver, out of sight of the main camp. The air was cool, and mist curled off the Ohio like breath from a great beast. They found a patch of meadow tucked behind a line of willows, the grass thick and long with night dew. The mounts dropped their heads greedily, tearing mouthfuls without pause. Mo squatted on his heels, watching them graze. Most of these boys ride like the war ends tomorrow. Don't reckon they'll see it until their horses fold under them. Calder knelt beside him, resting his elbows on his knees. That's Morgan's way. Run fast enough, and maybe luck carries you further than sense. You trust luck? Mo asked, glancing sideways. Not by a damn sight, Calder said flatly. I trust what I can read in the ground, what I can see in men's eyes. Luck's just a word folks use to cover their mistakes. Mo nodded, biting back a smile. That was Calder. Sharp-edged, but not cruel. He'd seen enough to know the difference between bold and foolish. You ever think, Mo said after a beat, we might be the only two in this column who'll have mounts that aren't played out over the next 3 days? Calder looked at him then, that quick flash of dry humor in his eyes. Hell, Mo, we might be the only two left with mounts tomorrow, but ours will be ready if it comes to it. That's the difference. Most of those horses come all the way from Tennessee. These two have been at Uncle Calvin's, resting for the past 4 months, fat and sassy. The dun lifted its head, ears twitching. Mo stroked its neck, feeling the damp warmth under its hide. I've seen more horses go down to pride than anything else. Ain't gonna happen to mine if I can help it. Nor me, Calder said, his voice low but steady. He stood and looked east where the sun was trying to break through the fog. They can run themselves into the ground if they want. We'll ride easy, take better care of our horses than we take care of ourselves. And if the time comes, we'll still be in the saddle, while the rest are on foot. The two men stood silent for a moment, watching their mounts tear at the grass, each knowing without saying that loyalty bound them tighter than orders ever could. Calder jogged back to camp, boots whispering over the dew-heavy grass. When he returned, he had his rolled blanket slung over one shoulder, and both their camp kits bundled together, a small sack bouncing against his hip. He dropped it beside Mo, with a grin that was more habit than mirth. Figured we'd eat better out here than back in that dust pit, Calder said. He pulled matches from his pocket, crouched, and coaxed a spark into the small nest of twigs Mo had scraped together. Soon, a thin flame licked upward, and Calder fed it kindling until the smoke turned blue and steady. Mo laid a small pan across 2 flat stones and poured in a fistful of ground cornmeal from his pouch. Ain't no luxury, but it'll keep us upright. The fire snapped, and soon the smell of frying cakes mingled with the wet green of the meadow. Calder leaned back on his hands, watching the smoke climb into the pale sky. Smells better than anything Morgan's staff will eat this morning. You ever notice, Mo said, poking the cakes with a stick, an empty belly makes a fool twice over? Men ride harder, risk quicker, all because their gut's yelling louder than their head. Calder chuckled. You've been watching close. Half the war could be explained by hungry men. They ate slow, tearing the cakes in halves, chewing steady while their horses grazed a few paces away. Afterward, they stripped saddles and hung blankets over a low branch to dry. Both men set to rubbing down their mounts with worn cloth, the horses leaning into the attention, tails swishing lazily. By the time the sun cleared the treetops, voices carried across the meadow. A pair of troopers led their own horses out, eyes bleary, saddles creaking under their arms. You boys think you found a secret patch? One called, grinning. Mo shrugged without looking up. Ain't secret, just smart. The newcomers laughed, dropped their tack, and turned their mounts loose on the grass. Soon there were 6 men scattered nearby, some warming hands over Calder's small fire, others tugging burrs from manes or scraping dried sweat from saddles. Calder pulled a strap through his fingers, checking for fray. If Morgan don't give us another day, most of these horses won't last a week. One of the troopers snorted. Guess that's why we got luck on our side. Calder only glanced at Mo, the corner of his mouth tight. When the others drifted back into their own talk, Calder muttered. Luck's just another word for wasted horses. Mo nodded, rubbing down the dun. Then we'll ride on our own scents, not theirs. The fire crackled, the horses cropped contentedly, and for a brief morning hour it felt like the war was far away. The meadow was quiet, save for the soft rip of grass being torn by hungry mouths. Calder squatted by Gypsy's near foreleg, his fingers tracing the hoof wall for cracks. He ran a thumb along the shoe, frowning where one nail had worked a bit loose. She's been pounding hard ground too long, he muttered. If we don't set that nail, she'll go tender. Mo was already pulling a small hammer and a spare shoeing nail from his kit. He came over, Frog's reins looped on a branch behind him. Hold her steady. Won't take me but a breath. Calder stroked Gypsy's neck, murmuring low. Mo tapped quick, sure, driving the nail home with the craftsman's care. He rasped it smooth with the edge of his knife, then gave the hoof a final pat. She'll hold, Mo said simply. Calder grinned. Remind me to keep you around when we hit rough country. Across the grass, Frog pawed at the ground, ears flicking. His buttermilk coat caught the morning light, the black mane and tail stark as ink against pale gold. A couple of troopers near the fire turned heads. Look at that dun, one said, whistling low. I'd trade my rifle and 3 horses for him. Mo heard but said nothing, only went back to brushing the gelding's flank, checking for swelling under where the cinch had rubbed. He don't take well to strangers, he said finally, and he ain't leaving my hands. Calder shook out Gypsy's saddle blanket, hanging it high to let the dew burn off. The wool was still damp from yesterday's crossing. Blanket's gotta be dry or she'll get sore-backed, he muttered, more to himself than to Mo. He combed his fingers through the mare's short mane, checking for burrs, then laid the saddle across a log and wiped down the leather with a rag. Mo joined him, pulling Frog's tack apart piece by piece, rubbing sweat marks from the bridle and cinch. The rhythm of it was steadying. Men who cared for their mounts weren't killing time. They were buying life for the days ahead. By the time the sun was high enough to glint off the river, both horses stood gleaming, ears forward, shifting easy on strong legs. Calder stepped back, wiped his hands on his trousers, and looked at Mo. They'll be fresh enough for the march, fresher than most. Mo gave Frog's neck a final slap. Then we'll keep them that way, no matter how the rest ride theirs into the ground. The bugle's cry split the lazy hum of the meadow. Horses tossed their heads, men scrambled from fires and bedrolls, and the sound of leather and iron clattered across the grass. Calder was already tightening Gypsy's cinch, feeling her belly swell against the girth. Don't bloat on me, girl, he muttered, waiting her out before pulling the strap snug. Mo swung Frog's saddle up, the big dun standing calm as stone, only flicking an ear at the noise. He don't spook easy, Mo said. Calder grinned. That's why I trust him under you. They guided their mounts back toward the makeshift headquarters where Morgan stood, boot planted on a stump, speaking low to his officers. The general looked as sharp as ever, though his eyes were rimmed with wariness. He waved Calder over. Rook, you've a head for ground. I want eyes east and north. Word is the Indiana militia is thickening. His tone was clipped, more command than request. Calder nodded but didn't leave it there. General, you should know. This here's Moses Jerry, best tracker I've ever ridden with. You put him a mile out, he'll read sign at night most men would miss in daylight. Morgan's gaze flicked to Mo, measuring. Seminole, isn't he? Mo held steady, his voice low. I know woods, I know rivers, I know where men been. Morgan studied him a moment longer, then gave the faintest nod. Fine. Rook vouches, that's enough. But bring me truth, not guesses. We ride fast, and I don't have time for blind trails. Yes, sir, Calder said, his voice even. If he tells you something, you can carve it in stone. Mo's dark eyes shifted toward Calder, a flicker of understanding sparking there. It wasn't flattery, and it wasn't patronizing. Calder had laid it plain in front of Morgan. He respected him. No man had ever said that of him before. The column stirred behind them. Saddles settled, carbines checked, lines forming as troopers fell into place. Dust was already beginning to rise from the meadow, and the smell of sweat and leather carried on the wind. Morgan swung into the saddle, raising his hand for silence. Forward in 10. Scouts ride. Calder leaned toward Mo. That's us. They wheeled their horses, slipping out ahead while the rest were still mounting, the noise of the bugle fading behind them as the open country waited,